again, and welcome to War Stories, behind the scenes tales from the front lines of the media. I'm your host, Tom Curley. Welcome to the show. And of course, if you're new to the show, and even if you're not, a quick explanation of what it is that we do here is me and old friends of mine who worked in the business, show business. I refuse to call it the business of show. That is the tackiest, dumbest statement I've ever heard. Anyway, we get together and we tell old war stories, stuff that happened to us in our days when we were in the business. I was a director for CBS News for almost 40 years. And my co-partner in crime here, Mr. Garry Armstrong, was a famous TV news reporter in Boston, infamous reporter in Boston for almost 30 plus years. So anyway, last week's show was a lot of fun, and the weeks before that was a lot of fun, and sadly, one of the stories that we've been meaning to get to, and I'm really excited for it, is you've got a great story about meeting Yul Brynner. And 2 weeks ago we were going to get to it, but we ran out of time. And then, last week we were going to get to it, but we ran out of time. So this week we're definitely, absolutely going to get to it. But before we get to that, I have an announcement. I am really excited to say that not just that it's our 15th show, even though I said I wouldn't stop counting after 10, but we have a sponsor. We've got our first sponsor. I know. Who knew? I mean, this fast. And it's a sponsor that's near and dear to me. And it involves records. These days vinyl has become a big thing, especially with the kids, the younger generation. Vinyl and vacuum tubes and everybody has to have a vinyl record. But then again, we also live in a society where, everything is busy. On TikTok, you have to have something that's, 30 seconds or 1 minute, or people lose their attention span. So oddly enough, I'm glad to welcome this sponsor, and they do provide a service giving the young people vinyl, and at the same time addressing the fact that we live in a world today that is just moving very, very fast. Now, do you remember the old and the kids won't remember this? I think it was called the Columbia. There was a record club, the Columbia something, or the Longines Symphony Society. Yes. Where you paid, I don't know, $25, and they sent you a record for the rest of your life, and probably a bill for the rest of your life. Yes. You were a collector. Well, our sponsor is an offshoot of that, and I'm happy to introduce the first commercial from the Long John Sump Pump and Bassinet Society.
Are you one of those people who feel stupid and uneducated when the subject turns to classical music? Was the last classical music you listened to Brahms' Lullaby? Well, if you avoid listening to classical music because most of it is long and boring and goes on forever, then we have just the thing for you. Static House, a division of the Long John Sump Pump and Bassinet Society, is offering you this great 2-album set, No Time for the Classics. You'll get, on just 2 albums, 101 complete symphonies and sonatas. How do we do it? It's very simple. We just perform them real fast. You'll hear Bach, Mozart, and, of course, the complete symphonies of Beethoven. Remember, you'll get all the notes in half the time. That's No Time for the Classics. Order yours now, and here's your announcer to tell you how.
Call 1-900 P.O. Box 797, St. Louis, Missouri 60609. $3 for the first minute, $4 for the second minute. Third minute, we hang up.
I was an avid collector, Tom. Once a month we got the records.
Exactly. I mean, those were the good old days, and now they're back, thank God. And apparently we will have further other commercials in the future. The Long John Sunpump and Bassinet Society has quite a number of features, not only records, but classical plays. I think the next one is No Time for Shakespeare. So we'll look forward to that in future episodes. So anyway, getting on to today, you were telling me before we get on the air, you were doing a series once where you were, there was something to do with Walter Mitty or Walter Mitty-esque. What was that all about?
Yes. This was in circa 71 or 72. I was new to Boston, and I had a wonderful news director who was also a shoe salesman, which I don't know how that melded together, but he wanted to make me a big star, which never really happened. But he gave me one word of advice. If you remember that the tagline in the movie The Graduate, where the old guy whispers to Benjamin, remember, plastics.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
Well, my news director whispered to me saying, I'm Garry, I'm going to make you, you're going to be the next big thing in Boston. And I said, oh, okay. He says, just remember, when you go out to do these stories, I want them to be bizarre. I want them to be really, really bizarre. I nodded my head. And so he said, one of the first vehicles we have for you is a Walter Mitty series, which meant that I would be doing stories that were like the things that if you were just an ordinary citizen, these are things you dreamed about doing, like riding with Robin Hood, that sort of thing. So we did 4 or 5 different segments. One of them had me skydiving, and we're still looking for the video of that. I think we have at least a still of that. One that I know we have a still of is me dressed as a jockey at Suffolk Downs, which was, I'm not quite sure whether it still is, Suffolk Downs was one of the big racetracks in the greater Boston area. So I was dressed as a jockey, and they put me on a horse. I really mean they put me on a horse. I wasn't very good at riding back then. And lo and behold, the people at Suffolk Downs thought I was a real jockey. Now, the series went over relatively well, as I remember, but the reason I mention this is not only do I look like a dwarf or really stupid looking like dressed as a jockey, but the story had legs. You remember the show business term, that meant the story lived on way beyond its initial airing. Now, Mickey Rooney came to town one of the myriad times he came to Boston, and Mickey Rooney was an avid fan of the ponies. And the photographer we had, the cameraman we had, was a guy named Al McNaughton. He was known as Fast Al McNaughton because he was in love betting on the ponies. So Al McNaughton, during the course of the time we were interviewing Mickey Rooney about whatever it was, he said, you know, Garry Armstrong, the reporter, was also a jockey at Suffolk Downs. And Mickey Rooney's eyes almost jumped out of his head. And he says, well, Garry, do you have any tips for me? And I said, Mickey, that was just it was a gag. It was a series I did. He said, no, Garry, you can trust me. Everyone in Hollywood knows I'm trustworthy when it comes to the horses. And I said, Mickey, I'm telling you, it was just a fun series we did. So we went from the TV station to Suffolk Downs, and Rooney is talking to some of the trainers and other racing people there, and he keeps pointing to me. And what he was indicating was that I was the secret answer to making horses win races. And people kept staring at me. And so finally, one guy comes over and he says, Mickey Rooney tells me you have an inside tip on who's going to win the Daily Double. And I said, no, I'm a reporter. Don't you watch Channel 7? He says, no one watches Channel 7. And I said, well, I know that already. And he said, well, if Mickey Rooney says you're a jockey and you're going to win the Daily Double, just give me a number. So I said, number 7. I just pulled it out of my head. A lot of people bet on number 7 that day, and number 7 came in winning that Daily Double. And Mickey Rooney, until the last time I saw him, always swore that I was just really the big mind when it came to horse racing in Boston. Garry the jockey at Suffolk Downs. I didn't win an Emmy for that one, though.
You know, that reminds me. There is a classic episode of Candid Camera, and for you kiddies out there, Candid Camera was this show that used to be on he played practical jokes on people, very elaborate practical jokes. Yes, Ashton Kutcher and Punk'd did not invent it. It was just a reinvention of Candid Camera. And the host was a guy named Alan Funt. And the shows were all hysterical, but I do remember one, and I was a kid when I watched these, but they stuck in my head. And one was they went to a racetrack, and they hid a speaker on a horse. And as people would be walking by this horse, the horse would go, hey, come here. Come over here. Hey, come on. And the guys would go over. He says, listen, you want to bet on Juicy Fruits in the 7th. It's a guaranteed win. And the guy goes, what? He says, listen, you got to trust me. I'm the horse. This is from the horse's mouth.
In the 7th race, there's a horse called Devotion. Repeat that.
7th race, a horse called Devotion.
Bet everything on the nose.
That on the nose?
On the nose.
And it was hysterical that almost all these people would like, really? Oh yeah. And then you'd see them going to other people, and they go, you got to bet on Juicy Fruit. Why? Well, that horse gave me this tip, and it was hilarious. It was great. The other great thing they did, this was, I think, the most brilliant thing they ever did was, all right, the one thing that always weirded me out as a kid watching movie musicals, is, you got people acting and they're talking, and then all of a sudden they all break out in song. And they're all professional, and everybody around them starts dancing in perfect choreography. And I go like, that's weird. Well, anyway, they set up a diner, and everybody in the diner was a professional actor or actress. And there'd be one guy who was the mark, and he'd be sitting in this diner, just a greasy spoon diner. And the guy next to him would suddenly, a perfect stranger, would suddenly turn and start to sing to him. And everybody would jump up and they would start dancing, and people would bring out instruments and they'd start playing. And the guy would just sit there going like, it was the funniest thing ever. My story, it's not really related, but it got me thinking. And a couple of shows ago, we talked about celebrities that we've met that were very, very, very nice, and celebrities that weren't. And it reminded me that that also extends to shows and crews and production staff. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, I was on the crew of the Joan Rivers Show. A wonderful, wonderful show. It was just so much fun. Joan Rivers, just one of the most awesome people on the planet. Everybody loved her. And it was a daytime talk show. It was no different than Sally Jesse Raphael or all the other ones. And it was very lighthearted. We had an audience. It was almost usually 90% women, 10% gay guys. We would do makeovers, which they would take 5 people from the audience, 5, regular average-looking women, and do a complete hair and makeover, and they would come out looking really, really pretty. And then the final one would come out and would be drop-dead gorgeous and was always a guy. We had a lot of... Joan was a gay icon, so we had a lot of gay LGBTQ material, and this is long before that acronym even existed. But we didn't take ourselves seriously. We knew what this was. We'd have a band on, and the crew, the production staff, were all just delightful. As I remember, all of the crew, they were all consisted of young single Jewish women under 30 and gay guys. And everybody just had a good time. But across the hall in the CBS Broadcast Center, where we taped this, filmed this, was the Giraldo Show. Now, this is back in the day when Giraldo, had his daily talk show. It was shortly after, maybe a couple of weeks after the episode, where we had on members of the Ku Klux Klan and members of a black organization. And I know this is going to come as a shock, but they got into a fight on stage and ended up throwing a chair and breaking Giraldo's nose. So, it was, they loved that. They milked that forever. But the funny thing was the crews, they were both shows were owned by the Tribune Company. So for some reason, they felt that we were rivals, like we were, members of a family. And they would come over to us and, they were very officious. And, our ratings are so much better than yours. And we would just look at them and go, get the fuck out of here. And we used to laugh because, like, we looked at ourselves like we're Animal House and that fraternity. Right. And they were that other fraternity, where Niedermeyer and all the Kevin Bacon and all, all the assholes were. So one day, the contrast to the shows, I never really worked on Giraldo, but one day I had to. Somebody called in sick, and I had to go over and fill in an audio position. I was on the floor. I was the audio assist on the floor. And so I had a headset on so that I could hear the control room and the director and everybody. Well, the show that week was a retrospective where they had the producers each go back to some guests that they had on in previous years, and they would bring them back on and to follow up, what happened. And so when I was there, they had this woman, very nice woman, and she was up all alone, just her and Giraldo. And he said, so what was your story? Well, her story was that 2 years earlier, she had don't quote me, she had like a 4-year-old daughter, 4 or 5-year-old daughter who needed a heart transplant. And she came on the show to beg for a heart transplant. And so then Giraldo goes, how did that work out? She says, well, my daughter did get a heart transplant. I think thanks to this show. Audience applauses, okay, very nice. So then he goes, and so what happened since then? How is she today? And she says, well, sadly, it didn't work out and she died. So now, here's where I was both appalled and impressed. The whole room went silent. Okay, you could hear a pin drop. All right. And the camera is on her. All right. And I hear the director going, push in, slow, push in, push in, push in, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. Now, if you're sitting in that room, that you're that woman, and you have just been reminded about the death of your child, okay, what's going to happen? You're going to cry. And they sat, and I watched them, and they pulled in, and the second a tear came down, they went, okay, cut to camera 2, boom, 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 wrap it up, go to a commercial. And I went, wow. And the producerette behind me, who was the one for that segment, she's going, God damn it, I expect her to cry more. And I just went, are you fucking kidding me? And I said, I really wanted to go home and take a shower. But that was the difference between those two shows. And that was back then. And I mean, look at it now. Now it's called Fox News. It was sad. But anyway, I don't know what made me think of that. But it was, in our naughty or nice format. So that was that.
Tom, two things I have for you. Number one, the crying thing, and you set it up so I don't have to feel that bad about it. But one of the mandates we had when we went out to interview the grieving families of victims of violence, that sort of thing, is you had to get the photograph of the loved one who had been murdered, whatever. And you also had to talk to the parents, and the key was you wanted to get them to cry. And most of the cameramen knew the bit, and as you asked the question, that inevitably would lead up to the emotional breakdown. They would not zoom. They would go in very slowly, and as soon as you saw the tears come down, you would just stay on that shot, and you just hold it, and they would usually freeze the shot for whatever. So I think we were all guilty of that. And shame on me, shame on all of us who did that, but that's what we did. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Tom, is I only had a couple of "Hi, how are you" with Giraldo Rivera, but he was, we had questions about him. What was your take on him since you did interact with him? Giraldo Rivera.
I'll tell you exactly my take on him. This just reminded me, this is a true story. I met Giraldo many years before. In fact, it would have been 1972. I was, and a good friend of mine named Chris, we were on our way to be interviewed for a job at the ABC radio network, something you're aware of, the same place that you worked. And
right.
I was a junior in college. All right. So there I am in my suit, my only suit, walking up to the ABC, the broadcast center where that was. I think it was up on 66th Street, 65th Street.
Right.
And we run across Giraldo Rivera, whose car was stalled in traffic. And Chris and I go, "Oh my God, that's Giraldo Rivera." Now, at the time, he was a reporter for Channel 7 in New York.
Right.
This was long before his documentaries and his Al Capone vault stuff, but he was a known figure. Right. So we were starstruck. So we walked up and said, "Whoa, do you need any help?" And he goes, "Yeah, my car died." So we help him. We push his car, I don't know, half a block or so till we find a parking spot we can push him into.
Right.
And he doesn't even acknowledge us. He didn't turn around and say thank you. He didn't even turn around and say, "Oh, gee, two guys just helped me." He just ignored us like we weren't even there and just walked away. And I remember, I looked at Chris, he looked at me, we went, "What an asshole." So yeah, that's my impression of Giraldo Rivera. And okay. It was, amplified even further, after doing that show. But yeah, what can I tell you? It's
well,
awesome.
that's another
yeah
chalk mark of people who have met him. If you had told me just the opposite, I would have been surprised.
Yeah.
And he's still with us, and he's still working. Is he with Fox now? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, he's the quote unquote, he's the pseudo liberal at Fox. I don't know. I don't watch Fox News. I worked in the building. I consulted for Wall Street Journal digital video. So I didn't work for Fox News specifically, but I went in the building, which was called the Death Star, and with good reason. But I knew a lot of people who work in Fox News, crew. And, I'm sorry to tell all those people that watch Fox News, as you found in that defamation suit, yeah, they lie. I mean, they really do. They make this stuff up. They realize they have an audience that wants to hear. They want to be angry. They want to be afraid all the time. Because here's the weird thing that has been discovered. Anger is a drug. That flight or fight syndrome, that releases chemicals in your body. Just like feeling good releases chemicals in your body. And you get addicted to them. And people want their daily dose of fear and hatred. And as Fox News discovered to their detriment, if you don't give it to them, they leave. That's why on election night, when they called Arizona, people started fleeing, and Fox News freaked out. "Oh my God, we're going to lose our audience, So it's really sad, but that is the case. So again, now as we've promised, we were going to get to we're going to get to
time.
It's that time. Your story about Yul Brynner. I can't wait for it, but we're going to have to wait for it because we ran out of time again.
The closing line in the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
The closing line in the Magnificent Seven. This is the original, the 1961. Is where Yule says to McQueen after they, killed off all the bad guys and they're riding away. Brenner says, the old man was right. Only the farmers won. We lost. We'll always lose.
The old man was right. Only the farmers won. We lost. We'll always lose.
It's going to get better. The longer we wait, the story
Better. I know.
I
I truly can't wait for this story, and yet we are going to have to wait. Well, it's now time to get to the plugs. Of course, the blog, Serendipity Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth, where if you go to it, Marilyn, the author of the blog, which I contribute to and you contribute to, all of the episodes of Media War Stories is on her page, so you can peruse them right there. It's easy to get to. It's a great blog. You will all absolutely enjoy it. And then, of course, the sister podcast that we have, which is Get Off My Lawn with me, where we talk about life, the universe, and everything. We have still yet to find that actual answer. And, of course, Voicescapes Audio Theater for the best in audio drama and comedy. And a half-hour radio show, the hysterical cult hit from the 80s is back. So that's pretty much it, Gary. We did it again. Apologies to Yul Brynner. Is Yul Brynner still alive? Is he still alive? All right. If he's still alive, apologies to Yul Brynner. And if he's not alive, posthumous apologies to Yul Brynner. But trust us, folks, you're gonna love it. I heard it next week. I'm telling you, I laughed, I cried. It was better than Cats. See you next time.